are waiting for Yosef will join us as well. All right, I'm gonna add this. Share screen. Share. At the stage. All right. Great. Am I going to do this where I can actually see this properly? This is still quite small. Hello, Hebrew Nazarite. I hope you're doing well, sir. All right. So there's a few chapters in this. Thinking if I should wait for Yosef or not. Well, we're definitely going to wait for him to discuss some of the things we want to discuss, but we're going to go through probably 5 or 6 of these sub-chapters. We might not do all of them today. We'll see how much we get done. But this is part of this is a halachic book, a Jewish law compilation that the Rabbi Melamed has been working on for many, many years. And it is really reaching a point, a size where it is seen as a legitimate source of understanding the entirety of the Jewish law, as more and more elements get added to the series. And the final, not the final one, but the most recent one is faith and its commandments, which is a real discussion of how what are the ramifications, the Jewish law ramifications to questions of faith, which of course demands one, if done seriously, to really take a deep dive into these concepts of religion and the other religions as well. How this relates to us here in the little corner, specifically in Jacob Federici's little corner. The caveat, he's not in the corner, he's in the Jordan Peterson sphere. Either way, a lot of our conversation with our Noahides over there are with regards to really understanding this idea of the other religions around us, how we are together moving towards God and finding a space for that. So in this fantastic new 2-series books, he discusses the Noahides as well, and specifically an element that causes a lot of tension, which is joint worship, Shituf. And that is a little what we're going to get into today. There's chapters just on the Eastern religions, on Islam, on Christianity. There's also a chapter on the future of the world religions, which is really towards the end of his book, even though a few months ago, Jacob and I did a review on that chapter. Okay, good to see you too, Tayo. I hope you're well. Oh, I didn't leave a link. Of course, people are welcome to join. Excuse me for a moment. Welcome. And I truly believe, as I'm sure many of you are aware of the news, that the best response Israel could have, specifically when I'm speaking to you now in my safe room, is that when the sirens sound, we should be singing and praying louder. And when we are in these dark times and these dark rooms, we should realize how our light should shine brighter. And this is true both to the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims. Please God, inshallah, we will have peace. I really hope that we're moving into a completely new paradigm, one that we only dared to imagine. But we'll hope for the best. Yosef, how are you, my friend?
Doing okay.
So I gave a rough sort of put this into context a little, what we're doing and what we're reviewing. I spoke about also how specifically today, part of the tension we'll discuss is this idea of joint worship, which is part of a larger conversation that, of course, if anyone wants, they're welcome to go on Jacob's channel or my channel and see that there's been discussions, definitely in the Noah, in the Brit Olam classes. So this is in no way going to be fully extensive, but we will cover different notes over here. I will be reading in English and doing, let's say, sort of a or trying to just do an immediate translation over here. But you will forgive me if there are some lags with my brain software translating these words. And we will, of course, jump into footnotes. I think some of them are necessary. I hope you could trust us when we review these notes. I might be skipping some elements, but rest assured we are touching upon the things that are most, I guess, permanent to the conversation we're having. Jacob, welcome. I hope you're doing well.
I have to leave soon, but I thought it would be Mishatef in a discussion about Shituf.
Thank you. Yosef, any thoughts?
Yeah, so if people want to actually check out the text, Chezi has dropped a link in the Jacob's Discord and the Noahide channel. And, you can either use Google Translate or throw it through an LLM, which is probably better, much better than Google Translate these days. For if you want to try to follow along in English. This has not been published in English yet. I don't know if he said that.
No, unfortunately, it's really brand new off the press. Again, I was fortunate to have the notes for a few years already, but this just came out, and it's at least going to be a 2 to 3 year process before this comes out in English. Unfortunately, that's what I was told. They're working on other stuff, which is great, and maybe they're relying on conversations like this to allow them to promulgate their words. However, we should just say that when this came out, and this is already part of a conversation, there was a book. His name is One, which came out around 2 years ago, which was already making some of these references. But to see this coming from this rabbi and from the series is really sort of a shift in the community's understanding, and more specifically, a sort of internally, that we're going back into these ideas and rediscussing them and opening them up again for conversation. I believe this is another data point signaling to a redemptive time, that we realize that there's time to reach out across the aisle and see all of us as carrying his image. I'd also point out that because of the controversial nature of some of the elements over here, there's already been some articles and conversations about that Yosef and I have been sharing in the Discord as well, because you could see that this will raise some waves. Without further ado, let's jump.
Let me just give a little preface, because I think it's important for people who aren't Jewish, who don't know Orthodox Judaism. So there are rabbis who are called poskim, who are decisors. Yes, that's the translation, decisors. And so when a rabbi who has reached the level of being accepted as a decisor, with which Rabbi Melamed has, makes an authoritative public statement about Jewish law, that has great authority by itself. So anybody who decides to follow his opinion is considered someone who's within the fold of what I like to call the 4 cubits of halacha, right? So while not everyone may necessarily agree 100% with what Rabbi Melamed says here, anybody who follows his opinion, especially when there's so few other people talking about this stuff, the term is yesh lo al ma lismoch. He has what to rely on. That person this is part of the tapestry of being an Orthodox Jew, and that's why it's so exciting that when a respected decider decides to write about this stuff, like, this is halacha. This is what it means to be Jewish.
I think thank you, Jacob. That's a very good clarification because Yosef and I are not rabbis. Many times you will hear with regards to this topic, and specifically in Jacob's orbit, a lot of ideas fly around, a lot of controversial ideas fly around. And these are topics that sometimes, while they're legitimate sources, they're being brought up as a one-off source. And Yosef and I both don't have any authority to make a decision either way with regards to how one should consider or take on said halachot. However, like Jacob is mentioning over here, this specifically from this rabbi as part of a large halachic corpus that this rabbi is doing, this really signifies like a different status, so to speak, one, like Jacob says, that we could rely on, right? So you're not hearing this from Chezi, or you're not hearing this from Yosef, you're hearing this from a rabbi whose, as we believe, his tradition goes all the way back to Moses.
Same time, he is not a pope, right? So there might be other poskim who disagree with him.
Who is he? He's going to mention them, of course.
He will mention some of them. And he, in many ways, what this does most of all is open up a new discussion or continue the discussion for some active engagement by other poskim, because the issue becomes one that gets more attention, and they can actually have the most knowledgeable and most qualified people for this job of figuring this out will actually engage in this question once they realize that it needs attention at this moment.
All right. And Andrew, hello, sir.
I feel like I need to just make sure the Christians understand this isn't like, let's say somebody from, John MacArthur says something and other people are like, well, that's John MacArthur, etc. We have a large number of rabbis who are considered decisors, and when any of the decisors who says something, it is considered now a valid opinion for the entirety of Orthodox Judaism. And unless the large numbers of rabbis come out and say, no, this person is wrong, which frankly is inconceivable that would happen with Rabbi Melamed and somebody of his stature, this is now a valid view within Orthodox Judaism.
All right. Okay. So with no further ado, the 5th chapter, Haisu lebnei Noach, right? The prohibition to the Noahites. And this is in the context of idol worship. And so it tells us that idol worship is forbidden to all men. There's no other sin like it that has his mind swayed from the path of truth and believing in God into the path of evil or wickedness, so to speak. And that's why it is already agreed that the first commandment is that man was given. Man as an Adam was idol worship. And Kedin Israel kach bedin ben Noach. Just like Israel, so is the law with the Noahide. which is that one who practices idol worship is required death, which we'll get into what this means. However, the main purpose of talking about this is to really stress the fact that he is missing the mark and sinning towards God. But practically, the relationship to people that sinned is complicated, yes, it's nuanced, because there are people, just like there are commandments that their punishment is death, like idolatry. So too, there are many commandments that grant life, and the total tally is done by God, of course, the ultimate judge, and the way God wants us to be living our life. And he also just like God wants the best for us, so too we should want the best from righteous people who want to ultimately worship God. And so did just like Abraham, who treated all with love and would be running after people to bring them into his house and honor them with food and drink and bring them closer towards the belief in God, even though during his days all were participating in idolatry. And this is true about idolaters that were also were at a very, very low status, that were really worshiping like dust and nothing even to, if we're looking at, let's say, Jethro as, let's say, a high grade idolater. So we're talking about even the regular riffraff, they were worshiping nothing. And as we also learn from this, that he was learning in the merit of the people of Sodom as well, even though to all their sins that he did, still they knew they were doing idolatry. Nevertheless, he still was wanting for, was hoping and praying.
I don't know why you skipped over the Abraham inviting people into his house.
I did.
Okay.
I just said, and I want to jump into this note over here, specifically with regards to the death element over here, which I'm pointing out over here. On all these the seven Noahide laws, the punishment is death. However, and this is very important to realize in Judaism, we speak about this a lot in the little corner, about once every 70 years was a murderous Sanhedrin, right? Because we really try to avoid that. So even though it says that the letter of the law says that the punishment is death, nevertheless, one does not have to act upon that on the ground. Here, really more to stress the problematic nature of this sin, and specifically when it's done in order to how would you say hatrasa, Yosef? To lahatris, to you're doing it purposely in order to bother the other one, to trigger the other person. Okay, only in that case where you're really making this. I'm sorry.
Like provoking, right?
To provoke people, then there would be a reason to potentially consider capital punishment. And we also learned that this is same with the Israelites as well, that they also have a punishment, a capital punishment. However, generally speaking, it was very, very rare for that to happen, right? The Sanhedrin to do everything they can, taking the circumstances into consideration, to avoid death. And generally, this was really happening to murderers specifically. Okay, so it's just important to point that out, that when we see such a scary thing like death, we have to realize that this is a tool, and specifically, it's there more as a stressor of how bad this is, not that you actually will be killed. We're living today in times where people are feeling very comfortable taking little snapshots or quotes from the Talmud and using them willy-nilly, so people should obviously be very careful with that. Going on. Even when we're trying to qualify what is this in these behaviors of idolatry, it's the same with Noahides like it is with the Israelites. And the האיסור החמור שעונש מיתה הוא להצהיר לקבלת האליל כאלוה או לעבוד בדרך פולחן המיוחדת לו. And the punishment of death is when one declares that this idol is his God, and worships him in a specific way for that idol, for that God. or one of the 4 ways that were worshipped in or considered worship in the temple, which is bringing on a sacrifice, the incense, and bowing down actually to the idol as well, and nisuch hayayin as rikat hadam, so blood rituals or sanctifying the wine as well.
That's libation. That's libation.
Libation. Sorry, I was wine practices best libation. Thank you, Jacob. כמו לישראל כך לבנוח אסור לבטא כבוד או חיבה לאליל, גם שהדבר נעשה שלא כדרך הפולחן המקובל לאותו אליל, כגון לחבק את הפסל או לשקו או לנקות לפניו, אבל אין חייבים מיתה על כך. כמו כן אסור לבנוח לעשות פסל, אבל לא עושה אותו אינה חייב מיתה. So he just gives a practical element of here, which is you're not allowed to hug this statue or kiss this statue, but nevertheless you are not required death for it. So to a Noahide can't create a statue, which obviously an Israelite cannot. And we discussed this already in earlier chapters. Us together, we haven't, but this is discussed in earlier chapters of the book. But if the Noahide does this, he is not, there is no capital punishment to that. Now, I want to skip for a moment, if you guys don't mind, to the thing we're actually talking about. Okay. And so, עבודה זרה בשיתוף פירושה שאדם מאמין שהשם הוא אלוהים, והוא מקור הכוחות ובעל היכולות להשפיע עליהם, ולכן הוא מתפלל אליו. אך יחד עם זאת, הוא מאמין שהשם ברא כוחות שונים שמנהיגים את העולם כדוגמת איתני הטבע, ויש להם יכולת עצמית להשפיע על מה שקורה בעולם, להטיב ולהרע. Okay, so joint worship here is man believes in God, that he is the supreme being, the unmoved mover, the main honcho, and he has the power and from him flows all, and he worships and prays to him. Nevertheless, he believes that God created other powers, okay, that could also affect and lead the world. For example, like he gives an example over here, like the elements, and they have their own power to affect what happens in the world for good or for bad. And because they correspond to the person who is praying to them, they get good things if they're praying to them, and if they get bad things if they're not praying to them or worshiping them. So he bows down to them as well. But by doing so, he's still joining his worship to these, we'll call them, let's say, Torah, to the sun god. He's doing this together with his worship to God, and this would be called a joint worship. Yosef, any comments?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Like we learned earlier.
Is this publicly available website, or you have to pay for it?
Publicly available. It's on the Noahide. I linked it on. It's actually, I didn't link it over here, but it's linked on the Noahide Discord. I linked it to Jonathan.
Drop it in the comments here too.
כפי שלמדנו, like we learned, לישראל עבודה זרה בשיתוף אסורה. כמו עבודה זרה, right? And Israel cannot participate in this joint worship element, right? And it gives us a verse here from Exodus, meaning each Jew that believes in God, but also worked other gods aside from God, will be killed. The commandment for Israel, as we see in, as he mentioned over here, Hear, O Israel, right? The commandment is for us to believe in the unification of God, the one God, and the way Rashi, the commentator, translate that verse, he says, the God that is now our unified God, right? Or if Paul, I see, is here, we'll just, for all intents and purposes, the agentic God and the arenic God are one, right? We realize at that time that not everyone in the world realizes this yet. And one day in the future, they will all realize that this is all one. And hence we have and we talk about here in other, gives other verses of not making any mask or not making any idol. And that's why we were warned from this. And Nachmanides mentions that this is specifically for the Israelites, because their job is over here when they are being Am Gula, the elect nation or chosen nation, which we've spoken about often. That's a very loaded term, what this means, Sgula. But for all intents and purposes, we were there, as Jacob likes to say, as a priestly class, and we're here to exemplify what this belief in a unified God looks like. Right? And like he says in Leviticus, and I'm here to separate you from the other nations. And obviously, but this is happening with the context of other nations, right? We're not here to be alone. We are here to be part of a larger game that's being played. And like Jacob says, and in Exodus, right, a priestly class. Right? That's why God cannot accept. He gets very jealous if we participating in idolatry. It's because you've been given this frequency to only worship me, and then hence God is not going to tolerate any other frequency when were given this clear frequency already. And this is what he blames the Israelites in the golden calf, right? Which is ultimately, it wasn't that they thought the golden calf was God. Rather, they thought that Moses was gone. They needed a new leader, and they decided to build this golden calf. And that's why he enters over here. Ultimately, they get killed by the Levites by sword, because even though they didn't, it wasn't idolatry, nevertheless, for Israelites, once you bring in anyone else, this is a very, very big problem. I won't get into this. We've double click on this element in the past, but for now, let's keep on going. It's not the same as in the sin itself for an Israelite that is participating in joint worship is not as heinous as just a classic idolatry, only idolatry. And he gives sources for this as well. Okay, now this is where we get to the squirrely parts. This is now he's going to mention the opinion that are more lenient with joint worship for Noahides. Right, so he mentioned over here there is a disagreement with the decisors with regards to can Noahides participate in joint worship. And he says with this question specifically, it also relates to the believers in Christianity that believe that this man, right, or Jesus, is God. According to most of the decisors and commentaries, even though it's ideal for a Noahide to believe in the monotheistic frame and the Jewish monotheistic frame, right? Of course, we could claim that there are different monotheistic frames. The way the Jewish rabbis traditionally have come to understand this, only the people of Israel are commanded in that specific unified belief, and he is not, as we said earlier. But Noahides don't have this prohibition, because all time that they are as long as they're believing that God is that the Father, ultimately in this context, is the main event, ultimately speaking, right? And even though, and they know that they're ultimately speaking to him, and even though they join their worship with another God, even though there's a mistake in this, it's not considered idolatry. We see that the Israelites in the Torah does warn us from any type of idolatry and from a statue or from some sort of element like that. Yet we see that the Noahides are not warned from this, because as long as they are joining in with the worship of God, there is no prohibition with them building statues, and because of that, we don't have to destroy them. And we learned in a previous element over here in the 3rd chapter that we do not accept at the temple a sacrifice from an Israelite that participated in idolatry. And we see, correct. And from a Noahide that does participate in idolatry, we still accept his sacrifice. This is also something that Solomon worked very hard to push through, which also led to his downfall potentially. And this is the reason he does this is because, again, the reason we accept this to the Jewish law is because we don't identify what he's doing as idolatry. We learned that the Israelite has to give his life for this specific unified concept of God, and Noahides are not required to do so. And again, for the same reason, because as long as they also believe that in God, or specifically believe in God and participate with something else, they are off the hook with that regard. And we learned that the Israelite can't make any statues of angels or any.
What's the citations here to Halacha Gimel, Halacha Bet?
In just earlier on in the Peninei Halacha, we just didn't read that. We jumped straight into.
Oh, okay.
Not making the moon or the sun, or not making the stars. And again, Noahides don't have that prohibition. And again, he keeps on going into the same line because they do not have this issue. Again, he mentions where in the Torah we are being told again and again and again to specifically participate only in this version of worship of God, in this specifically stressed version of monotheism. And after this verse, we see over here, Be'erur Rishonim, our sages already have clarified to us that God did not reveal himself to the nations of the world the way he revealed himself to the Israelites on Mount Sinai. And the way he manifests to the rest of the world is through nature. We'll call it the Arenic God, right? As we say, Asher chalak Hashem Elohecha otam lechol ha'amim tachat kol hashamayim, that God dispersed them all under the stars, right, under the celestial beings, these forces. וכיוון שלכל עם בארץ, לכל עם ולכל הארץ משפיע שפע דרך הכוכבים, מזלות ושרים. Each nation has its own influence from its astrology, its lux, its how do you say the sarim? Its mediators, Yosef?
Yeah, I guess the
usual translation of sarin is princes.
I mean, it's powers and principalities, but yeah. The mediating energies,
The mediating forces
that kind of.
I think principalities is probably the best word here.
Principalities, these mediated forces, they may associate to them their own forces and powers and worship them as well. And many of the sages learn from this that as long as they are worshiping God as the ultimate God, there isn't an issue with them doing this joint worship as well. And he quotes different sages over here as well. Although the main goal is to sanctify and to I don't want to say rectify, but to, how would you say, lezakech, to distill and purify,
refine.
Thank you. To refine the worship in God to, like we're talking about, to this very specific monotheism that we're talking about as Jews. And so it will be in the future, he says. And he gives over here, he mentions Zechariah, that God will be king over all the land. And on that day, he and his name will be one. Right? We're hoping for that day. But however, as long as the moral and spiritual status of the world is not there yet, there is a fear that Noahides will not believe at all, and their moral status may be affected by this. And that's why it's better that they should participate in joint worship. And they will, by doing so, they will come closer into understanding God and believing in God, and remove themselves from the evil inclination for evil and murderous inclinations, and slowly they will ascend in the hierarchy of or the malot, the treads or the stairs of belief and ethics as well. Any thoughts, Yosef? Comments? Okay, he's good. Okay, I'm just looking over here in the comments if there's anything we should mention over here. Okay, in a lot of the comments over here, he is showing he's going through the different rabbis that he's quoting that he's coming to these conclusions from. And again, if someone wants to, I am glad to go over that soon. Okay, now he goes to the opinions that are more strict about joint worship with regards with regards to Christians. So on the other side, there are those that see that just like joint worship is considered completely idolatry for Israelites, so it too is for Gentiles as well. And while we did learn that the Torah did give them the seven hide no hide laws, right, to elevate the Gentile status, nevertheless, with regards to idolatry, the Israelite and the Noahide are the same. And he quotes where we learn this from in the Talmud as well, which quotes this opinion. And just like in the way they do this teaching over here is just like an Israelite is commanded on this, so is the Noahide. And there are other claims that if a Noahide can participate in idol worship, then they already won't have. Then there's no point of this prohibition of idolatry, because ultimately they all believe in this source, right? Because, and he gives a quote over here from Malachi, which from the east and from the west, everyone ultimately worships God, right? So we're already saying at that status, we're already there. So and this is something that already in the Discord we see that there's, even with our Noahides here, there's a tension with this that we need to be sensitive to, right? These are confusing ideas. And we said that our sages said that in all places, idol worships ultimately they reference God at some point, and nevertheless they're still considered idol worshippers. One second. Okay, so it's just a little technicality over here that doesn't really matter so much, but basically they say that they don't accept this opinion. And we also learned that another reason why we did this, because we had an issue, a cultural issue, which is we were living together with the Christians. And because of that, and because we even know that even though the Christians, according to these more strict opinions, are unlike other idolaters, it's clear that they are also worshiping God as well. Nevertheless, because we have a issue over here that we don't want to have a cultural exchange with the Christians, we have to put this again in a contextual idea. What was going on with the Jews and the Christians? There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of tension there, as many of you guys know. So at that point, we wanted to make sure that this would not be prohibited, because ultimately this could lead to a lot of confusion. And at a period where we want to be building up fences and showing a very, very strict divide, having ideas such as this could be extremely, extremely confusing and lead us down to a dangerous path. Yosef, please.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to add to that. I feel like there's a whole discussion to be had here, and
it's only the first out of many discussions about this.
Yeah. What do we say? So, I mean, there is this inherent tension, and so I told Fuzzy earlier. A number of you have heard this before. That one has to kind of flip their understanding in many ways of what, especially coming from a Christian, I think, perspective. I'm not sure about Islam. That when one thinks of the commandments, all the commandments, so I don't care, Noahide, Jewish, all the commandments, 613, 7, as sort of the minimum, the baseline, that we all are given a baseline through our various covenants. That's the baseline. It's not the ideal where we're all ending up. It's where we're starting from. the commandments are right. Don't require someone to have super high intellect. Don't require to have certain emotional, EQ, artistic skill, like all of those things, all those personal things that come, that can deepen our individual abilities, and ways to connect to God in all the various ways. And there's, there's many ways to connect to God as our people, in a sense, right? But the commandments are given to us as a baseline that everyone is able to do for the commandments that are given to you. So, right. So I'm not given the commandments for Levites or priests, because I'm not either of those things. But the commandments that are given to me are in my grasp. They're not in heaven. And it is not, and the system of commandments understands that as a baseline, and it's not the idea that you need, that humans can be perfect and and are going to do every single commandment, never mess up at any given point. We all have room to grow, but the commandments are all things that are achievable, within our grasp. And when I talk about this in terms of the Noahide laws, I like to use, it's a bit of a technical kind of analogy, but the 7 Noahide laws are really the minimum interoperability requirements for non-Jews to work with Jews, right? So this is, in some sense, these are the minimum requirements, those 7 things. If someone has those 7 things, then Judaism is compatible enough with them that we can share I don't know, redeeming the world, doing tikkun olam, like establishing just societies, fulfilling the divine mission, and ultimately kind of fulfilling the messianic vision, right? But it doesn't have to just be eschatological. It's also kind of within this world. This is the minimum operating kind of requirements for working together. That is not to say, right, as we know, each of those 7 laws actually are categories, and there's lots of components to all of them. There's plenty to open up, and as he's gone over, that book already, and there's plenty more to unpack and grow, and individual ways and communal ways that people can connect to God and deepen their beliefs, experience spiritual experiences, wisdom, like all of the things we talk about, meaning, narrative, everything that we care about. But we have to understand that there's a difference between what is the baseline and what is kind of the ultimate possible, visions. And there could be many visions. Sometimes they're a little bit different, and that's okay. In some ways, it's more important that we start at the common baseline, and the tension here is there an impulse within understanding the Noahide laws to be as broad as possible, to understand that most of the world, if not all of the world, is already somewhat Noahide or partially Noahide or even fully Noahide. Probably not. That's probably a little more extreme, but that we already are at the conditions that Judaism can already work with other religions and can build, and there's room there for more stuff to happen. Or is there a deficiency that people have to overcome from those various religious backgrounds in order for this to happen? And in some ways, this is kind of an alignment problem, because the impulse for kind of like interfaith work and dialogue and growth and working together at the large kind of religions interacting with each other as religions level often is in tension, is misaligned with kind of the discussions around the individual, because an individual who's becoming, say, Noahide, and taking on that identity is leaving or coming from a different background, and does want to grow more, and they, and that is, obviously super admirable. I mean, like a wonderful thing, and they do want to grow more into their connection. It does happen to make them more compatible with Judaism, but also in many ways, like, it's also just what they think God wants of them, right? And that's really what focus is, in deepening their understanding of what God wants from them from a kind of a biblical framing. And they may respect Judaism and hope there's wisdom there that helps them along that path. And there's reasons for trying to increase cooperation. But what the individual needs to do that, and to feel and to have an identity and to feel because they're part of that path, is sometimes, as I said, in tension with kind of these communal discussions around what do we need to have for interoperability. And I think one of the things that you really see in some of these discussions, especially from folks like Rabbi Melamed or people like Alan Brill or Rabbi Ben Abramson, or Dr. Alan Brill, music titles, right, is they're often working at kind of the religions interfacing with each other level, right? So they're having like formal discussions with, priests and imams and pastors, and like, but at like, at institutional levels of like, can we work together, and like, is there enough shared common ground here? And that is often going to be much more broad, and be much more willing to open up the boundaries in a way that will, that for the individual level, and the rabbis who work with Noahides one-on-one and try to like do things at that level with individuals trying to grow closer, it's there's a discomfort, right? Because on the one hand, like, why am I leaving anything if I'm already Noahide? And that's not really right. We can get very wrapped up in the identity of what it is, as opposed to understanding the difference between like starting point and growth and kind of end vision, or at least some sort of, maybe multiple end visions, but hopefully overlapping enough that they kind of are compatible. Okay, that's my spiel.
So first of all, thank you very much for that, Yosef. I think it's worth just reiterating again how it's important to remember that what we're reading right now is less from, let's say, a while it sounds like interfaith sort of kumbaya-ish, right? Where this is being written from a Jewish perspective, right, towards the other religions of the world, and by doing so, like Yosef was saying, that there is a sense. And we already see this discussion in the Talmud, right? For thousands of years ago, there's a discussion, which is we need to make sure and we recognize that all are made in his image, right? That the tent has to be wide where everyone could come inside, right? This idea of like, that the Gentiles, that our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Christian brothers and sisters, our Hindu brothers and sisters will all have his image, and will and by that merit, they of course all have a place in the world to come. It's very, very important that we, even as Jews, as believers in ourselves as a priestly class, we're doing that together with everyone, right? This is a joint thing for us to do together. And that's why it's very, like Yosef saying, it's very important for us to recognize that this umbrella of Noahides, right, is very, very wide. And like Yosef said, when it comes to the individual, right, and I'll just give an example over here. I'll just quote something that Maimonides says, because Maimonides definitely initially in his conversation specifically about the Noahides tethers it to the 10 Commandments, right? And he's pulling also the Noahides of the world all the way back, sort of to speak, through the prism of Judaism. However, he does also mention not only the tribe of Levi, but any one of the inhabitants of the world, right? Any person whose spirit generously motivates him, and he understands with his wisdom to set himself aside and to stand before God to serve him and minister to him, and to know God, proceeding justly as God made him, removing from his neck the yoke of the many reckonings which people seek. He is sanctified as holy of holies. God will be his portion and heritage forever, and he will provide what is sufficient for him in this world, like he provides for the priests and the Levites. And thus David declared in Psalms, God is the lot of my portion. You are my cup. You support my lot. Blessed be the merciful one who provides assistance, right? So this is what Maimonides also says as well. So we also have to realize that there is language being spoken to the masses, and there's language being spoken to the individual as well. Okay, I'll just end this last portion where he concludes that the majority of the decisors practically, when on the ground, that there isn't a prohibition for Gentiles to participate in joint worship, and that's why the Christians are not considered idolaters, because even their belief in Jesus, they still believe in God. I understand that for some of our Christians will be like, of course we believe they're the same person. And he says this is true also to our Hindu brothers and sisters as well. He gets into. Sorry, please.
So I'll say that there's two things here. One, well, something we didn't explain in our multiple introductions to this, is so a posek, a decisor, when they there's different modes in which they operate, right? So when one writes a book and it is for general consumption, the position they take generally, this is kind of an interesting thing, is not going to necessarily be the same as the advice sorry, not the advice. If an individual person asks them a specific question about a situation, they might give them a different answer than the more generic position in this book, and that is part of their, right and power, or their responsibility, is they are meant to tailor. If they ask specific questions, they have to tailor them to the given situation, and all of the contextual, environment, agents, agent arena, right? Like all that stuff has to be taken into account. That's different when they write something like this. This is one of, just going back to the tension I mentioned. If an individual Noahide came to Rav Melamed and asked them about a specific practice within Hinduism, like, can I have this statue in my dining room and do X with it? That is not going to necessarily be the same, right? Once he has all the facts and he's going to weigh all the different considerations on which it takes priority, that may or may not be the same as what the conclusion one draws from reading this book. And this book, in many ways, kind of is going to tend to default to the more, I'm not going to say, well, Chazzy just called the kumbaya position, which is not necessarily the way to read it, but it is going to be more interested at the communal level of how to think about these other religions, as opposed to individual, this is how you actually should deal with a specific practice, like a Christmas tree, or like a crucifix, kissing, an icon, etc. Right? There's going to be much more specific and embodied, and it might matter. I haven't read his Christian chapter yet. Maybe we will at some point. But I don't know if he differentiates between different types of Trinity, right? Monarchical versus egalitarian, stuff like that. And if he's asked a specific question though around those things, like he may say one is like Shituf and one is actually problematic. We should also be clear that there are religions that do not fit this category. Like he is trying to make this as broad as possible. He's dealing with major religions. I think a lot of the ancient paganisms, if you look at ancient Babylonian paganism with Marduk, is clearly not the same situation as Hinduism. There's not one creator God that everything else is like an avatar or manifestation of as lower principalities, but they are actually different and separate gods. Those would still be prohibited, and I think animisms, some types of animisms at least, are still prohibited under his framework. I still have to read this in full, so I'm not going to promise that, but I have a feeling that there are things that are still beyond the pale, and he's not just saying everything is cool, right?
No, not before. I think that's an excellent point. And what Yosef is saying, the individual Noahide, right? If he spoke to Rav Melamed would probably reference and send him to Rav Shirky's book or the other books out there which get into the specific ramifications for a Noahide in his context, right? Am I clean? Am I? Can I sculpt a cross, or am I sculpting a cross because it's for my Christian wife's father? There's all different things that could come into this, which will complicate and change what the rabbi will say. So I think that's very, very true. And to another point, what Yosef is saying, which is this is not just like a blanket hall pass, so to speak, with regards to joint worship. I'm also going to point out Yosef over here. So he talks about he mentions the Hinduism, and he speaks over here that even though he says some people call this complete idolatry because it's packed with idols and different gods. And he references a book called Shut B'Mera Bazak, which is also a fantastic, fantastic book. And some people said that it's considered idolatry with joint worship, which he mentions Rav Eliyahu ben Amazog, who is a contemporary. Was in Yemen, a contemporary of Maimonides. But he says, but my conclusion is, based on what I learned about the Hindu religion, is that that the main attitude towards the main source, which is called Brahman, which is he is infinity, eternal, and the soul of all existence. And the other gods that are ultimately just manifestations from him. They stem from him. And he says that while in the beginning, a minority were considered joint worshipers, but today, as the world has grown and ascended, and more, it seems like that if you even ask, all people know who Brahman is, and because of that, they believe the sources of their sages that say that he is ultimately the source of all those things, and because of that, that is the main source. Right, so Yosef. So my only point is that he's not just saying he's pointing out over here. I understand why one would think the opposite, but I'm ultimately looking for that source. And where I won't find the source, right, like in Marduk, then obviously there's nothing to discuss.
And there are forms. This part of the problem here is also, and I don't know. Again, I haven't read his Hinduism chapter, but there are forms of Hinduism that don't have that. Right, this is a huge split in Hinduism. Hinduism is not one religion; it's like a lot of religions. There are some that are actually very, very close in some ways to Judaism. There's a very interesting argument that what is it? Bangladeshi, one of the Adventisms. I don't know. There's something that actually has a lot of resonance with Kabbalah and has a lot of the same metaphysics. But there's so many types, and like there's like one of the huge divisions, from my understanding, in Hinduism is those that think there is one God that all the others, and then those that think it's all illusion and there isn't like anything else. And there's you kind of get into the Zen, well, the stuff actually that you get with the Kyoto school and the stuff that John Vervaeke kind of introduces to the Kyoto school and in that version of Zen Buddhism, where there's really like a capital N nothing behind all the being and non-being.
Correct.
That is, I mean, we argue whether it's nihilistic or not, but it's certainly not a creator, God, deity can be personalized like anything like that, right? So I would put a lot of asterisks on here, and also you also shared in Jacob's server, and I guess if people are watching this that aren't in the server, they can ask us. Alan Brill's article about Rav Melamed's there's some parts of Hinduism that he doesn't seem to have quite brushed up enough on, and he's using kind of English language, outdated critiques mostly for positions from Christian sources, and that maybe, and hopefully that will open up conversation, right, to refine this position more as needed. And yeah, I think I'll put a lot of aspects.
I think so. That's also totally fine. He does mention, so he does like, it's not extensive, but he does like a fairly deep dive into Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, and then he speaks about the different stuff going on in the Eastern religions, and he talks about how there's a lot of death, there's sacrifices going on at the time. So right, so as he says, and he mentions over here as well that initially it was a minority, right, that was participating in this joint worship. As the world it starts being aware of other people out there, and we start seeing that these commonalities, then presumably you could start sort of creating this path. Now, I should mention also that part of this, which is what's amazing about this, is the courage of coming out with the things that he's saying and writing these things down. That does not mean, like Yosef was mentioning, that like if indeed other rabbis come and show that where he's getting his information from is flawed, or there's an issue with that, he will definitely correct his position. Another thing to point out about Rav Melamed, I don't want to say naive. He believes in the goodness of people, and he is taking people at their word. So not that he's not looking into things, but he's going to say, if this source I'm mentioning, and these are God-fearing people that take themselves seriously, then that's going to carry some weight. Now we could argue that's not going to work in a science lab necessarily, but for this conversation, that is his assumption until it's innocent until proven otherwise. I just to point over here to our friend who has some interesting comments over here. First of all, I feel for any pain, death, or devastation that you or your family are dealing with. Of course, it's horrible what's going on. Please, God, we'll have peace with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So you don't have to worry about that so much. We're all with you. We want there to be peace. And with regards to almond tree, just your just a point with regards to Brahman and Abraham. So yes, there are some people that mention how, the first Vadas are being written during the time of Abraham, and Brahma is sort of like Abraham backwards. There's a whole learning about that in Judaism. There is the gifts that he gave the concubines' kids, which is, if you look over there in the verse, it's from east to east. It's like the Far East. So there was a discussion over there that potentially there was some sort of cross-pollination over there. Our sages teach us that Abraham, the gifts that he gave to the concubines' children were called Shemot Tum'ah. I guess the exact translation would be like unholy names, but again, unholy has like a negative connotation to it. It's more of like different sequences, right? If we are told to only participate in this specific monotheism, we'll call it the FM frequency. Abraham still gifted the world with an AM frequency, which you could say was the pure version of what was going on in the East. And over the years and the generations, that sort of changed. But that would be its source. And there's different things over there with, the mantra relates to the Aleph Mem letters in like sequences that the Kabbalists do. There's the Kundalini Yoga, which relates to the standing prayer, but that's again for a different discussion. And there's people that are vastly more informed than I am about this. Okay. The change with regard to Christians and the, what would you say, Haminim would be heretics? No.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and heretics. Okay. So he says, but we need to explain, why did the sages of the Talmud consider the Christians as idolaters? And now we see that at the later generations, we said it's not an issue. We could give 3 different solutions that all complete each other or join together. But before we go through them, we will first mention the opinions that won't accept the explanations we're going to give, and we're going to have to find a different explanation why the Talmud rabbis thought that Christianity was complete idolatry. Okay, correct. So he's going to give his explanation, and then he's going to give one other explanation. Okay, the first explanation is, in the beginning, many Christians were Jews or converts, and we all knew that we all agreed already that Jews cannot participate in idolatry, and that's why even if they're doing a joint worship, it doesn't matter for them, and that's why there's no point accepting this as well. You know what I love about, by the way, just about these comments? Like, look how committed they are. I look at this ultimately as like we're getting closer to Messiah. Like, I appreciate the comments. I know like you're very mad at us, but like the fact that you care so much makes me very happy. So I appreciate you caring so much, and keep it up. Okay, the second opinion is, because Christianity approached the idolaters, the first Christians worshipped Jesus and the statues that they saw in churches. And even though the Bible was their foundational, the foundation cornerstone of their religion, and the church fathers also reached out and related to the God that identified himself to the prophets of Israel. But nevertheless, because many of the Christians, including the monks, were not literate, much of their worship to Jesus was just like the old worship other people were doing, right? So the claim over here is saying that while it is true that there's a nuance to Christianity, in its earlier form, the people that were participating in were doing so basically like idolatry. And slowly but surely, in this process of elevation and ascendance, Christians decided to realize that there's a bigger story happening over here. And they started focusing on the belief in God as you see in the Bible. Parallel to this, we saw that many of our rabbis, our sages, saw a reason to be more lenient with regards to the Christians. that they are worshiping God in this joint worship. But because much of the belief of many Christians was still considered idolatrous, they decided not to do it, right? So they said, if you're talking to one specific person that fully understands his theology, then okay. But for most people, it seems like they're still locked in this other paradigm, and that's why it was an issue. Moving on, many learned how to read, became literate, and the reading of the Bible strengthened their relationship with God. And more people participated in worshiping God and being aware of the verses that prohibit idolatry and creating statues. In 1517, this is what he talks about, the Protestant movement comes together and they completely remove all the statues from their churches and destroy them. And they only leave the cross, which is this, this tselem, this icon that they worship. Also, not alternatively, at the same time, we have in the Catholic trend, we see over here that they did leave the statues there. But they strengthened their relationship with God as they understood from the Bible. And their church fathers and their Christian leaders explained to them that these statues are only symbols, right? They're icons. And because of this, towards the end, the rabbis decided that this too is considered joint worship. Okay, third, so the first time we said because the Jews were not relevant. The second thing we said because at the time it was contextual. At the time it was only far and few between were the people that were walking this line of joint worship, and most people were participating more in this idolatrous fashion. As the world progressed and people became more literate and people understood more and dug deeper into their own religion, specifically going back to the Bible, there was a clarification made, a refinement made, and then they realized that these things are more symbolic, and even the cross itself is more of an icon referring to Jesus. But this allowed them to be seen as far as the Jewish prism as joint worship. And now the third, because Christianity comes from Judaism, but shook its foundations and its belief structure and its Torah, Judaism saw specifically from Christianity a grave threat. And that's why we called it minut, or specific kind of heresy, that we must stay away from. And then even though we're aware that it's clearly talking about non-Jews that are participating in joint worship, right? So we said it qualifies all the things we just said to not be an issue. Nevertheless, we were more stringent about this because of the fear we had from Christianity. However, nevertheless, over the last generations, when Christianity has clearly removed itself, after many generations, Christianity has clearly created its own path, and it's clear that it's a separate religion, and most of its believers are all Gentiles, and they returned back. So because of that, they returned back to the original status we spoke about, which they don't have this issue anymore, and that's why we don't see them as heretics or idolaters anymore. Okay, this brings us to this other chapter over here, which are the opinions that don't see Christians as idolaters at all, right? So this is really out there. There are some that say that Christianity is not considered idolatry at all, even not in joint worship, as in that from the get-go, this is kosher. Because the Christian sages constantly repeat and say and claim that they believe in unification, just as they understand from the Torah, right? So they're saying there's no Trinity, there's nothing, it's all one, ultimately. The Divrehem, according to them, the Trinity that they believe in is not but only a manifestation of one God, right? We speak about this often. And one of these manifestations is through Jesus. And according to them, believing in the Trinity doesn't take away from this, or doesn't annul the unification, the Jewish classic specific unification. Even though there is, he says over here, shibush gadol v'stira pnimit, even though according to him, or according to us Jews, there is a large contradiction over here inside, nevertheless, it's still not considered idolatry. And because we're believing what the Christian sages are saying, their statues and their crosses, they don't have any divine presence to them or status to them. They're not considered idolatry. Now, of course, this relates back to what Yosef said. There would be great questions to now a specific person wanting to build a church, a Noahide. What would that mean for him in this case? But according to this, at least, seemingly this is the most lenient opinion. This is not even considered joint worship. However, according to most of the decisors, the decision is not made based on fully understanding what the Christians believe or claim that they're doing. Because on the ground, many people, including priests, believe that Jesus is God. And they believe, and they bow down to the church, to the cross, because they believe that there is a divine element to it. And that's why we would still have to call it joint worship, right? So he's basically saying over here that there are some, I'm giving an example, but I could be wrong about this. Yosef ran off actually for this example, but there are some people, you could say that Jacob's conversations with Father Stephen the Young. Okay, here we found this guy, and this guy, you know what? Okay, he's kosher. He's doing it. But the question is, how many people are out there? How many people are actually doing that? How many people believe that all these are really a manifestation of one really thing, and all of it's the Father? So it is a question, and this is what the caveats Yosef was talking about as well. Nevertheless, this is still a very, very controversial take. They get deeper into this. He's quoting different rabbis over here in the footnotes. By the way, this is number 14 over here that this is all just one footnote, and there's many of these footnotes where he explains why it's not considered idolatry. But he says, however, most people disagree with this opinion, and they do see this as a joint worship. He speaks about over here some differences also in Catholicism as well. But again, like we could get into that if someone else wants to get into that. And I believe this is the last chapter. Okay, so this is those who see Christians, righteous Christians, as a ger toshav, as a resident foreigner, right? This is saying a biblical understanding, a biblical term. So he mentions Rav Meiri, who has two opinions with regards to the Christians. One is Christianity is not considered idolatry in joint worship. Rather, it's considered belief in God that has just issues with it. He has grave issues with it. Two, that nations that are participating according to morality and the ways of the land, or let's say we'll call it like natural morality, and created a system of laws based on that morality system, they are considered resident foreigners who participate in the 7 Noahide laws, and then we are commanded as Jews to love them, respect them, and assist them with every way possible. For the first thing we said about the Christians being not idolaters, but actually it's considered a legitimate path, okay? Most of the decisors disagree with this. They don't agree with this opinion that it's considered kosher. It's a kosher path. Rather, they see it as a joint worship path. But to the second opinion that we said, most rabbis did agree. And because there is no issue for Noahides to participate in joint worship, and because, according to that opinion, Christianity is also not a problem, okay? So nevertheless, we could still identify qualify Christians today as foreigner residents that could live in Israel, and we have as Jews a commandments to take care of their livelihood, love them, and the way the Meiri calls it, it says is to multiply a hello, but that means in that language it's to really invest in building a relationship with our Noahide brothers and sisters as well. And with that, we conclude this element in this chapter. Yosef, as you left, I just added he mentions over here that it's a minority opinion that sees Christianity as not idolatry. And even according to that opinion that is heavily relying on the Meiri, also the Meiri, who doesn't see it as idolatry, still says that while it is a monotheistic religion, it has many, many issues with it.
Sorry, I would just add the part of the challenge, and we're hoping at some point, right? I mean, there have been individual poskim who've gone into this, but not like published a book on it. The different, like the Meiri with the type of Trinity the Meiri was encountering versus the type of Trinity the Tosafot were encountering were not even the same. Even though they both lived, they didn't live that far apart, and they weren't even like right. But the Meiri is in 14th century Provence, and there's at the time, right? There's a whole anti-pope thing, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in Catholicism and in his region specifically, Carpentras and Provence, and like there's a bit of a mess. But the type of world that he's encountering, and exactly how much he even really knew about like all the ins and outs of the Trinity that people around him believed in. He also, of course, had like the Cathars in his region at the same time, right? You had a lot of Christian heresies. You had the beginning of the reasons for the Inquisition before the Protestants, which was, this growth of heresies in southern France. And he's kind of seeing that and like encountering a Christianity that is somewhat different than the Tosafot, who are in kind of the Loire Valley, or not even Loire, but like they're in, I'll say Lorraine, really. Right, so they're kind of up in it. They're into Germany, but really in the French-German borders, and they're the ones who initially come in Shittuf, but like their understanding of the Trinity, which they give very, very briefly, and it's really hard to kind of exactly make out what it is, isn't exactly Orthodox Christianity either. And then of course that's not to say that there are already multiple versions of Orthodox like trinities in Christianity, right? Because minimally you have the Catholic versus the Eastern Orthodox position, which don't really seem to be exactly the same. And I'm not going to like adjudicate that now, but like at some point you're going, if someone's going to really get into this stuff, someone has to probably do real deep dives with Catholics, with Eastern Orthodox, and not just like random people, but like their theologians, right? We're going to probably need to actually grapple with a lot of much deeper debates within Christianity, which isn't very attractive in the sense of like who wants to get involved in the debates, internal debates of another religion. But at some point, like if they're going to actually do this, they're going to probably have to clarify far more than they do. While we can base a lot on the Meiri, like the Meiri, we have to acknowledge that he just had a limited encounter with Christianity, and that consistent.
To be fair, the same should be said about Maimonides, though, right? Which is like I almost have no experience with Christians, right? And like
he had experience with Copts, right? But he's experiencing non-Chalcedonian Christianity, right? So he has a very different experience of Christianity than any of the Europeans do, right? Because and in some ways the rabbis of the Talmud, especially of the Sasanian, late period Talmud, are encountering mostly what Christians today would call Nestorians, which are an entirely different kind of. I mean, they are Chalcedonian, but like they're not considered Christians of good standing, right, by the rest of the church. So there's a lot to kind of probably take apart here, as far as like all of these people were experiencing very different forms of Christianity, and they may or may not have been actually engaging in very deep discussion at any theological level. We don't have a lot of evidence beyond maybe in France, some like more like deep theological discussions kind of going on between monks and rabbis. At least they seem to be more aware of each other. But those discussions tend to be much more about biblical exegesis than they are about theology. And there might be a reason for that, which is when you talk about theology, you're going to end up in a dispute in front of the Inquisition or a king, and that's just how the medieval kind of world worked. And whether Jews won those debates or not, winning did not mean that you generally got off and didn't get punished. Winning was, if a Jew won those debates, they often did not end well. So there's a lot to be said about the promise of today and our ability to actually have these discussions openly, and especially at high levels. The fact that we can have clergy from these movements or theologians from these movements, denominations, branches, sects, participate is a real privilege and affords an opportunity that just didn't exist even for community leaders, our greatest community leaders of the past, right? It's just these things didn't happen. Maybe there's a couple exceptions here and there one can think of, but they're really, really rare, and they never were not fraught. And not to say today isn't fraught either, obviously.
Okay, so I think that also that tension you're speaking about over here, like you said, it does require. I mean, this is also why we're having this conversation, because I believe we're in a new stage today, and the TLC to me is indicative of that, where we could see this. Hello, Michael. We could see this conversation happening within the TLC, which Christians themselves are trying to understand themselves better, and I think all this really is, in a certain sense, not all, it's a lot, but what it is a reach out from across the pond. And I often mention Rabbi Meni too, who says, we are brothers looking for each other in the field. And in that sense, this is there to show that there are channels of dialogue, and I can understand how it could sound patronizing, but for Jews, statements like this and a book like this allows us and potentially gives Jews much more freedom, both theologically and practically on the ground, to be able to have these conversations and be able to see each other in a different light, which is very, very important. And this relates to some of the tensions we saw in our Discord with regards to, okay, so on one hand, we have this Noahites, right? We're a minority. There's like 150,000 of us in the world. We're trying to find our own way. And then here comes this rabbi and drops down guess what? Christianity is kosher. So what am I doing? Why am I leaving my community? Why am I doing my own thing? Now, like we said, there are different opinions about this. And like Yosef and I were saying about how there's there's the basis, and we're always moving up, and we want to be taking on more, whether that's taking on more responsibility practically of what I'm doing in my life, to also theologically refining my concept of my relationship with God as well. And I believe Jews, right, Yisrael, wrestling with God is something that we're always doing, and we could clearly see in this little corner and in the meaning crisis, there's a tremendous amount of that happening as well. And I'll just end. By ending, I mean I'll open it up for everyone to add this part that I highlighted over here, which is, and these are things that we've alluded in the past, but again, to see it in a book like this is a very big deal. He mentioned, as the Rav Kook mentions, and he also mentions Rav Netanel Afayumi, that over many of these idolatry religions, there's still Christianity and Islam that are clearly influenced by the Bible, and they are the closest to God's light. And it seems like that even if the leaders of Christianity and Islam received divine assistance from God, because they were doing their best to elevate their people and their tribes and anyone that was worthy of this. So it's possible that that the heavens helped them create miracles as well. This could be alluding to, or even as far as the resurrection, right? These kind of concepts, in order to help and illuminate the eyes and the ears of their followers, so they could together promulgate and move forward elevating the world in belief in God and ethics. This is a much more radical take than Maimonides alludes to in his book, which is Christianity and Islam are path makers for the Messiah. Here he goes and says that even if the claims about them are true, that Muhammad saw Gabriel and Jesus resurrected, nevertheless, we still fit this in a rubric, of course, with our own reservations, that this too is to God's divine will. And I think that for Jews to be able to use this language, again, very carefully, allows us to move to a new phase of discussion, one where I believe Jacob, Yosef, and I have been participating in for a few years. But again, a book like this allows me to speak more confidently about this in my circles. Thank you all for participating, listening. I hope that wasn't too long.
Can you leave it open if Michael
It's
or
open.
anyone else wants to hop on for questions?
Yeah, I'm open right now. We could just schmooze. We could talk. Michael, you were waiting.
But yeah,
I caught a bunch of it, not the whole thing, but several portions there, and it's very interesting. I certainly, I have the connection in through my wife's family that it's important for us. I want my children to understand that as the Jewish aspect of their own history and stuff, but also I just always think it's sort of strange how so many people are searching for ressourcement, connecting back to roots, but where they choose to land, in the different historic branches of Christianity. I mean, whereas I came out, especially, essentially with the more modern interpretation that's already much more friendly towards Jews, and I think certainly the is putting away what I thought was that the more coercive tactics were put away. I think that there's somewhat of a resurgence of that in some areas, which is kind of disheartening because a lot of people don't seem to have a very good grasp of the full history between the Christians and the Jews. And, I see a lot of the failure just as on the part of Christians to not live up to the example and the standard that Jesus does, because I think that's, if we were doing that, we would be the kind of neighbors you would want, hopefully. And, so I think everything that's going on here is really good and interesting. And there's a lot of stuff I really appreciate about what I've been learning here. I think from my perspective and my own experience, the Christianity that I have most been in went so far in the evangelistic direction that it presented a very thin life style. As for how are you supposed to live, just in your daily life. And I mean, obviously they affirmed the good things of marriage and family and things like that, but it's not, it's not to the degree. It was like a solution that just could be pasted onto whatever the modern lifestyle, and then as the modern lifestyle changed, it was less impactful, because then it's just a facade of religion. And so I think that you guys have, I see that sort of a Judeo-Christianity is very much the best solution to answer a lot of questions of meaning crisis, because people just don't know how to have a regular life, anymore. How do you live in community? How do you find a spouse? How do you raise your kids? Those are the things that culture at large has forgotten, and you guys have preserved. And that's why Israel is flourishing in a lot of ways that other countries are failing.
Yeah. So I think it's complex because I think for Christians that are more open to these things, they are fairly comfortable to some degree with the Judeo-Christianity. I think what would make many uncomfortable, and I'm not gonna specifically for you, I don't know, but I've had these conversations before in UM and other places. Because Christianity for us is not exactly an exception to the rule. Like this vision is not any more Judeo-Christian than it is Judeo-Islamic or Judeo-Hindu in some degree, right? Like this is far more universalist than that vision. And it also, while yes, it says, like there's a lot of things we've preserved for our culture that have allowed us to weather the storms somewhat better than others, so certainly not untouched. There's the challenge of Noahidism specifically is that doesn't have that history of wisdom of cultures, multiple cultures, right? Because the vision of Noahidism is multicultural. That hasn't been developed yet, right? So, and how much of the Jewish specific wisdom is translatable, should be translated into that multicultural context is going to be a big part of the question. Because I think there'll be a lot to navigate there. And I don't think it's just going to be like, we can create lots of, a Christian Israel and an Islamic Israel and a Hindu Israel.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because, obviously, because that's in some sense, people would say like, oh, well, like the Messianic Christian communities, like that's the thing that I'm talking about. But like, it's not that, because those are sort of, well, I'm kind of uncomfortable with it, like some of the ones here where it's kind of like just just regular white people, but like when they adopt the mannerisms of kind of the Orthodox Jewish culture and like which is not, it's not like it's the same exactly as at the time of Christ or anything. It's like they're adopting all of the development along, so it's like, it's like in modern mannerisms. It's like, it's just like a cultural appropriation thing. And I'm like, well, I don't think like the way I see it is, that it really like there is like an aspect of the Christianity when it was done right that preserved, and Christianity, I guess, can and still does a good job of this, maybe of connecting that kind of like more Noahide element of it, like in that we're all descended from Noah. We're all coming from Adam. We have this creation mandate. Like, like I would say, okay, so this is an interesting example. There's that book PBK talked about a long time ago. It's called "Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes," about this tribe in the Amazon, and the guy that goes there to translate the Christian missionary. He goes to translate the gospel, and he doesn't meet any success. They don't understand it. Like they think it's hilarious when John the Baptist gets killed. That's their favorite part. They have this whole weird thing where like they don't like, because he gets somebody from like another village, somebody to read the translation, and then they present it as a recording, and then they're like, oh, well, we know that guy. He didn't see Jesus, so we don't want to listen to this. He doesn't know anything, because like the guy that's reading it hadn't seen Jesus as an eyewitness, and like their culture is like so like it's like the most skeptical, non-trusting culture of all time. And the mission, he basically, the guy lost his faith, but he had such this idea that was like everybody had to come to God through the path that he came, which was like, I think he had struggled with alcohol, and it's like, you have to recognize your sin, repent to God, and accept Jesus as your savior, kind of this very standard evangelical message. And then I was like, I'm reading it and I'm reading the whole thing, and I'm like, well, the problem with these people is they've like lost the message from Genesis. They're they're living in the garden. The point of the book is don't sleep. There's snakes. Their garden is overrun with snakes. Like they've given up stewardship of their patch of creation. So like the message that they need to reconnect to the Creator is not about like a personal understanding of their sinfulness. Like they didn't even have categories of that, but they had essentially abandoned the creation mandate to steward the earth and take care of what was given to him. So, I mean, it's not like, I can't say for sure that it would have been successful, but to me, it seems that is like the obvious connection. But the missionary was just thinking like, he just translated the one gospel and that's what he shared with them. But when those gospels were written, they were presented to the other cultures in such a, that had so much more connection to like the story that's all through Genesis. Like there's so many parallels there. So that was like the connection that that the gospel was being preached into, and essentially he just it assumes a background. I would say the gospels assume a background of the knowledge of the that was going around, at least around the Mediterranean. There's those Greek analogs, and every culture has their own version of it. And so it was like the Christians were, and the success that the Christians had was that they made that connection to, well, yeah, we are all descended from Noah, but here's Israel, and God's done something special through them, and now we can like be a part of that. And so it was just kind of a very limited view that I think the missionary took. That it in hindsight, it's like, yeah, his failure to connect with them seems it makes a lot of sense. So,
I mean, there's so many little trails we can go down, and like the idea that there's only one way to connect with God, and only one individual's journey has to be everyone else's, right? That there is one narrow path to the Father. Right, that's going to be, and right, Christianity has to navigate that in a way that Judaism doesn't, because Judaism doesn't make that claim in the same way. Though we can talk about whether there's analogs. But on top of that, right, there's, sorry, I'm still unpacking like all the things you just said.
Yosef, just sorry on that comment about in Judaism we don't have that requirement, because Michael said something that was reminiscent of Genesis 4:26, right? And so Seth, in turn, a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that God began to be invoked by name. Now, that in Hebrew is actually translated into Az Huchal Likro B'Shem Hashem, and Huchal could be translated as the beginning calling out God's name, but it could also be translated as, and that's when God's name starts to be gay. Now, you wouldn't even have to say that. It doesn't make sense to say that's where God's name began to be invoked, because what was being done up until that point? Clearly, people were invoking God's name. So really, it's here to stress that this is where God's name started to be desecrated. And to that, Yosef, I say that like up until that point, there is what we Jews, what we believe, what we practice. And then at that point, from that point on, there is a bifurcation in understanding God and in worshiping God.
Yeah, well, so there's actually a really beautiful alternative way to read that. You just gave two readings, but there's another one. There's a third path, which kind of does both, because it says that's when people try to start naming God, and right, and naming God can lead to idolatry, right? That is right, but it's also people trying to connect with God by naming. This is actually very connected to our whole topic of Shittuf, right? Because
correct. Those are the powers they're identifying.
Like, what does it mean that that's when they started to try to give God a name? And there, I think one of the things that is so different about Christianity, and the reason that it gets so many, as you were just pointing out, Michael, is that when they introduced it to pagan tribes, they tried to connect the pagan tribes to some universal history, and sometimes they made huge stretches, and sometimes people were doing it on one end of the empire versus another, and they were completely in conflict because they said, well, this guy's from this tribe, and then they were saying, no, this people on the other side of the world are actually from that tribe. But they were trying to connect them to it, and they also would change. They would try to get the pagan stories to match the gospel as much as possible, right? They would say, like, well, this story is actually connected to this story, or like we were reading Jesus as, you know, X in your religion, or Satan as X in your religion, right? They would try to map as much as possible to navigate something, you know, that I don't envy them that task. Now I don't know. Like, Judaism, you know, takes a very, very different approach to this, right? I mean, as much as we just had this whole conversation, we're not trying to get everyone to be Israel, right? That is not the goal in Christianity. We're not trying to graft everyone in. And there's and yes, we have universal history in Judaism, but the universal history is not there to like describe how they are like part of Israel, related to, like, right? Like the whole point of universal history for us is just that, like, basically to enforce the idea that everyone is in the image of God. Right? Right? That is the main, like, that is the basis. And in fact, right, in the famous discussion about like what are the great principles, and Jesus obviously has his two principles. In the rabbinic version of the discussion, like the two of those positions are much more like, the position exists, like it should be, love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's there. But the other positions are things like, and you know, these are the generations of man. That verse is like the most important verse. Not that that's a principle that you follow as like an obedience principle, but that we all are from in the image of God is considered the more important principle and the basis for love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a kind of an interesting. We use the universal history differently than Christians did, but we're not trying to absorb all the world in the same way. Because as I said earlier, like, and I don't know if you were here for this, like the Noahide stuff is whether we decide to classify large groups of people as Noahides or say it's much more, you know, you have to like take on these laws in a very specific way. They're minimal interoperability requirements. I'm going to stress that again, right? So like this is the minimum requirements that you need to interoperate with Judaism and like work together. It is not maximal, maybe it's not the ideal. It is not like, you know, could we do further, deeper, better, you know, corporation? Sure. But this is the minimum baseline. And thinking about it that way in this discussion is, yeah, I think that helps with this because it's not, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, that's the thing, like, okay. And I'm, you know, because I'm trying to figure out this stuff and like, you know, understand everybody, you know, everybody else has so many different positions. And so it's like, you know, you can't use terms like just universally because they all mean different things to different people. And so like, if in one sense, it's like the evangelistic aspect of Christianity, you know, I don't think it was right that it just got like, it's almost like the Islamic version where it's like, we don't care about anything about you just so long as you say these magic words, and then you're like part of the in group. And it's like, what does that do? It doesn't really do much good for the person. And if the person's not doing much good, then it's really just ruining the reputation of your movement or whatever, you know, like having a bunch of people like just to be in the group. But, you know, I more so see it like, so, and this is kind of the framework that I based my book on was, you know, Jesus has the parable of the sheep and the goats, and it talks about how, you know, when the people were thirsty, give them a cup of water when they're, and it comes out of, it's based on that, the testament of Joseph is what they say. That's where the text was probably based in. And it's funny because you look all through Genesis and it's like, you see all those things, giving water to the thirsty, food to the hungry, clothing to the naked, visiting the prisoners, you know, welcoming in the strangers. And it's like, oh, this is like a thing. You just look at these actions and it tells you like who is the servants of God. It's the people that do those things. And so essentially I'm thinking like, well, then us as Christians, it's like, it's not necessarily so much be concerned about getting somebody to join our tribe or whatever, but we need to be aware of the people around us that are asking for those things and give it to them. And then I think, you know, it's even more complex, you know, like to say, you know, it's not so much that people need food. Like there's a lot of like organizations that give people food, but we have to say, like, why is this person struggling to provide food for themselves? It's probably a deeper need. They need community, they need mentorship, they need guidance. And so, and this is where I've even said, like, what the way that the language that the Bible uses in the whole thing is that, it's of a family language. We're children of God. Israel is the bride of God. And there's like the relationship between brothers. And so it's like, you wouldn't, if you're going to invite somebody to join your family, you're not going to just say, hey, or say these words, then you're in my family, and then you're going to abandon them. That, like, the nature of the relationship requires a level of commitment that I think that's probably the area where Christians have fallen short, in that they haven't been always willing to really stand by they're interested in getting people to sign up, come join our church or whatever, but not walk behind them the same to that depth. And that might require that might mean you get slower growth numerically, but you have much stronger growth over the long run. And then you're helping those people to become also capable of competent to go and love their neighbors in a similar way.
Awesome. So so much to talk about over there. First off, as I mentioned this in the past, but something that was like very foundational for me, reading the story of Balaam, the evil prophet. And as a child, just realizing already then, what was fascinating to me about the story is not that the donkey's talking, it's just that God is having a whole conversation with someone else that isn't Israel. Right? That was just the whole, it's a whole portion in the book that no Israelites are involved. Like, it's all his conversation with God, with the other king that hired him back. Moses is not talking. So off the bat, already in our 5 books, you're being told, guess what? There's a whole conversation happening aside from you. So this is number one, to realize that, like, we very much see ourselves as a player on a larger chessboard, right? When we come back to the land and God says, you're going to look at the nations around you, that's an invitation saying, like, you're not here to play solo. You're here to do this with everyone else, and you have your own mission, but they have their own missions as well. I think it becomes, and this relates a little to the video you recently published, which is, once we're not those Jews that are living in these minorities living in other countries, right, where you have to sort of pay attention to, like, give them food and give them water. I don't think the world is used to yet. How do we deal with a Jewish state, right? That, doesn't, quote unquote, say, I want water, I want this, but actually comes with demands that also, let's say, we're even talking all the way to today, changing the Middle East and the map we're looking at right now, right? So that's a whole different sort of equation, which I think in some way Israel is mistaken. We're still very used to having, our exoskeleton of exile, where we don't really remember or know what it is to talk to the Muslim brothers or our Christian brothers. A book like this that we're reading about is allowing us to sort of remove that exoskeleton and put on, okay, now guess what? You did it. You made it back to the land. That's just a starting point. This is a conversation that Jacob and I have often, because there are some that see, Israel as, like, I don't see it's like, this is it. However, I see it as a stepping stone, as infrastructure that allows us to build the next thing, which puts a tremendous amount of responsibility on us, because ultimately, at least this is what I feel, the world is looking and saying, like, guess what? You got your land, you came back. So, like, now what? It's either be miraculous or just disappear. Otherwise, like, it really doesn't make sense. Then it's just like, what's happening over here? So that's a very big sense of responsibility we have. And I think not only does it include redefining how we reach out to our Christian brothers and sisters, but it also needs to define how we're going to reach out to our Muslim brothers and sisters, and more specifically, the Muslim and brothers and sisters that are living in our land. Because, like you mentioned about, like, well, Chazi, I see they're talking about the laws, the specifics about taking care of the foreigner or the widow or so now this is the tension in Israel. There's nothing more biblical than Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs and Judah and Samaria, right? That's where the whole story is written, right? And that's we have this very big political tension in the quote unquote occupied territories. But there's also nothing more that's mentioned in the Bible than taking care of the poor and the foreigner that lives in your land and the widow. So our tension with the Palestinians in their land is the biblical commandment. It's like we have to figure out how do we do this tension, which is like on the land that is the most biblical, you also have the most biblical commandment, which is like, how are you going to take care of this population in your land? So I think Israel and Jews, we sort of haven't realized yet that we're like a major player on the board. And if the world needed a version, to see that, I guess you could say the last week and a half was sort of like that story, but we really have to see what we do with that, right? Like, are you going to use this great ingenuity of like what you just did to Iran to solve the issues of poverty? Are you going to do it to actually work with the Palestinians that you have right now? Are you going to create a bigger space? So there's a tremendous amount of responsibility on our shoulders right now that hopefully we won't fumble. It is interesting to me, Michael, though, if you don't mind me asking, which is, when you hear me say a sentence like, here is like an opinion that says like, well, Muhammad or Jesus, they're divinely inspired, and as going as far as like, and there was a resurrection. Nevertheless, I still hold my Jewish stance. When I say that, is that like offensive? Does that feel like I don't need that favor from you, Chezi, of like even recognizing that? It's either recognize everything or nothing at all, or is the fact that I can recognize that for you saying like he's almost there, or I don't need him to be there, but clearly he sees me?
I mean, it's not offensive to me. I mean, because I think, and like that's, my own experience has been to try to put myself in the, in other people's shoes and try to like think about like what really affects your, people's beliefs. It's not the arguments and the words on the page. It's really a lot more connected to the way that people act and how they treat each other. And so.
Priorities, Michael. It's okay. You can talk to your daughter. I live in the I'm not going to get offended mode. And I think that, it's even in like the New Testament, it's very clear that so let's say he takes positions closer to what Sam Tiedemann says. It's not as common among Christians. That's to put the let's like err on the side of Jesus' humanity rather than his divinity or whatever. The Bible is very clear that that's the lesser.
Arrow's mom said that we get
Okay, give me a minute. That's the lesser error that you could make. There's a whole lot more dangers that come from adopting the Gnostic view that like Jesus was just this pure spirit or something, and it gets into a whole bunch of things. But I think it's just I mean I will continue to advocate for you guys and for everybody to come to your conclusions like in your own time without force, and that we should just try to live as best as we can to show love. And I think that's the most powerful argument that we can make, that we are right, or whatever, or that our beliefs are justified or whatever. And I think maybe the minimum requirements kind of thing for the Noahide is a very interesting idea, because it's like when I think about like people realize the problem with the kind of secular experiment of the United States was that it defaulted to like atheism, and that's really bad. So you can't have default atheism. Like, I think if we have the opportunity to change, that should be changed. But it's really problematic when you try to impose one specific religion as like the official religion. I do value the pluralistic viewpoint, and I mean, I think like Christianity. I mean, like, I'm Protestant. I'm an evangelical. I feel like we're on the cutting edge of the experimentation process still. So I don't know, what things we would like. I like that, and this is probably some, it's kind of funny because you get into these arguments like with other people. Like, I appreciate that these different historical churches like all exist. Like, I want them to be preserved for that sake. Kind of like how you guys still have a few of those Samaritans living in Israel, and it's like, it's like I think obviously God is behind that preservation. It's kind of a cool way that we can see like a living history of how things have changed over time. But I want to be on the change, on the growing, evolving end of that spectrum. And that means being humility, humility about the things we don't know.
I agree. I definitely also want to be on the growing, even though Judaism has its fears from reform, or let's say conservative Judaism. Nevertheless, I also believe in change. Again, like even my participation over here, or like these kind of conversations are indicative of that change already. I'm at sort of at a stage where to me, and again, I go back to the TLC when I love seeing the conversation between the Christians sort of happen, not because I'm sitting on the side being, they're falling apart, like between their conversations, more that like, it's beautiful to see. Luke is hungry. He wants to know the master of the universe. He wants to understand him. So to me, that is like amazing. And that's why I often quote the Talmud that says, he who rejects idolatry is called a Jew. And it's sort of like this, like basically like once you realize it's not a man in the sky, then like you're in the conversation. And then that level of nuance at that point is not for like me to convince you or you to convince me in that sense. And that's why I go back to, let's say, and a lot of what the rabbi here is mentioning is a response to the Catholic Church in 2015, when they come out and saying that, listen, these are irrecoverable promises. It's a mystery. We should start with the evangelizing, and while it's a mystery, Jews find their salvation through the Torah, not through Jesus. Now, that's a crazy line, which many Jews are not even aware about. But that line allows the rabbi to change his whole position. Once he sees that it's no longer a threat, and they see us, even though it's a mystery, they see us as like its own thing, then it completely changes the paradigm. And I think like as Jews and even as Christians, like we have to know when we have to at some point stop asking for no, but I need to see the GoPro that Jesus was wearing. And it's sort of for Jews is also say you know what? There is a guy, his name was Jesus. More than that, God loved him and God sent him, and he even did miracles. For a Jew to sort of accept that, historically speaking, is like bananas. But if I could do that, I'd be like, yeah, so it's great leader that's trying to take him, ultimately bring them closer to God. That to me, we are all already at that point participating in calling out God's name and bending the knee, whether it's Muslims or Christians or Jews. And the rabbi goes as far as even, bringing in Brahman and saying once we're all searching for the source, then that's what we need to be doing. And of course, tithing, taking care. So there's all the proper conduct that relates to that. So with regards to the Noahides, there's the 7 or the 13 or whatever you want to give your equation of how you read the numbers. From them stems, just like we have the 10 commandments that we have from them stemming 613. You have 7 Noahide laws that more stem out from them, right? Obviously the whole 613, anything that's related to women is not related to me, right? I can never keep all 613. I'm not a priest. There's many things I'm not doing. But in the Noahide, or at least the legal book that we read, has in it the commandments, and then it has in it like proper conduct, which is not something that you are commanded to do, but this is just sort of what makes sense. And I'll just end with saying the reason to me it's very interesting, specifically this time, is because I believe that the Noahide operating system allows for, let's say, the way a Jew would define it would be, I have the 613 Sharia, and Christians have their Greek version of their Sharia, and the Muslims have their Sharia law. There's the basis things that we agree upon, whether it's a God or doing good works or reward and punishment or tithing. But from that point on, then there are different versions of how people are experiencing this, and this is their own little contextualized expression of religious devotion that they each have, and we can make space for that. And as these things keep on getting more and more refined, due to God's infinite, his all-encompassing glory, it makes sense that there's going to be a Christian flavored version that's been developing over 2,000 years, and a Jewish version, and an Arab version, and a Muslim version and each one brings its own beautiful elements to it. And ideally, when we're all at the temple and we're all praising God's name in pure speech, to me, that is the redemptive act of Babel, which is now we come back and create something, but we don't have to be using the same words. Rather, we finally identified that when you say X and I say Y, we're aiming at the same thing. And I no longer need you to say Y like me. More than that, me recognizing how you say X just fills my Y with more and more light. But that's scary, because ultimately that means you're making room for the other without demanding that, like, that is the win. The win is making the room for the other, not that he has to look like me.
Yeah. That's the thing I keep kind of like getting in arguments with other Christians about, is that there's this idea there's this great desire for unity, which I understand, but it's always unity as uniformity, and that's not what I see in Scripture. And so it is that figuring out that tension, that something unites us without having to conform all of our other aspects of who we are to the same thing. We're not like a hive mind or a colony of ants or something. We're united, even though we can all remain distinct. And and I think that is the vision that is clearly represented in Scripture. But people just have more or less limited imaginations of how much how different can somebody be and still be like my brother. It is a tough one to answer.
Well, I think we forgot what it's like to imagine. I say this often about Israel, which is like, do we dare imagine something else? And again, like in these days, I dare to imagine a future where there's peace with Lebanon and peace with Syria and peace with Saudi Arabia. And I dare to imagine like a whole new paradigm over there. One where like we could, like I'm saying, even as stories as like, this is like a bad guy of the world being called to task.
I go to the gym.
Yeah.
So I leave at 4:15.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Like meaning they're gonna be
Okay.
Joe's night, so it's packets and corn
Okay.
and watermelon. Anything else with tonight?
I'll take care of it.
This makes me think of the David Busatil video. He said like everyone in the TLC has this moment where they turn their head. Their wife is asking them from
Keep her word.
Well, I
the real world.
Yeah, should probably get on taking care of that.
Michael, I appreciate
It's
the
an awesome-
conversation. Thank you so much.
Very enjoyable.
See you around the corner, buddy.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care. All right, Adam. It's nice seeing your comments as well. I always appreciate them. Jason was here as well. We miss you too. Lynn, amazing having you here as well. Risto, Muhammad wasn't a Jew. Jesus was. Yes, and yes. What else? Any other interesting comics over here? Monarchical Trinitarianism was always existed, has always existed in the East. Okay, very interesting. I think you kind of have to forsake Christianity to escape idolatry of it, or at least set it aside. But I think you can still believe in Jesus and that He is God, that He is God, but maybe more in a Jewish way. I guess she's gonna say. All right, interesting. Christians often conflate disordered affections with idolatry. I might love my dog more than I should, but that doesn't make me know because I don't worship my dog. Okay. Interesting. What is this? This has been clarifying and so carefully with loving them. Thank you very much. Our pleasure, Stephen. That's over here. I feel like Solomon had a reckoning with that nothing in Ecclesiastes, but not in the. Okay, so here you're saying like nothingness is like, is really everything in a certain sense. So I don't know if looking at I'll call nothing is really like this deep understanding of what nothingness is, but I do think that Solomon, and also probably because he asked for this, the gift he asked from God is wisdom. Is you have to think about yourself like these like there's a movie a brilliant mind, a beautiful mind, right? Like if you'd see the world and its patterns in such a way, there's also part of you that's sort of not really seeing the world because you're really disconnected from it in a certain sense. And him bringing in, or the example of bringing in like the Pharaoh's daughter, and she brings in idolatry into the temple, and sort of Solomon is doesn't mind that. I think because Solomon was already seeing things as they ultimately should be, right? He's looking at this like futuristic understanding of what God is expecting from us. So when people are bringing in idolatry, he's like, listen, ultimately they're all aiming towards God, so it's all good in the hood. But definitely at that time, I don't think everyone could understand what Solomon understood, and for the masses, it ultimately ended up being devastating. All right. While this wasn't what we were planning to do with the Noahides, really we're gonna be focusing on prayer. If there is interest in this, feel free to let me know. We could do a deep dive on just his chapter on Christianity, Islam, and the Eastern religions. Again, the conversation, which is a fascinating one, chapter about the future of the world religions, we've done in the past together with Jacob. May you all have a fantastic day. Stay safe. Bye, guys.